Hello, class, and welcome back to part 2 of our logical fallacy reading. We begin with false analogy, right? And it's a comparison that is not analogous, right? It compares two things in which the key features are different. If I may bring up two extremely culturally insensitive examples. Whenever somebody puts the word Nazi after something, I've heard students refer to English teachers as grammar Nazis. That's extremely insensitive. The Holocaust is something that is such a dark period in the existence of human beings that there are very, very few things that compare to it. The same is when someone will say something like a slave. Again, slavery is such a dark period in the history of humanity that only other incidences of slavery would compare to it, just like only other instances of mass extermination would compare to the Holocaust. So again, try to avoid being culturally insensitive and making those two false analogies. There's quite a few interesting examples in the book. One more trivial about how a person goes to eat at a vegetarian's house and expects meat to be served because they say if a vegetarian came to my house, I'd serve them vegetables, right? And Dear Abby says, well, you serving them vegetables doesn't violate your principles. Them serving you meat may violate their principles. They may not eat, the flesh of animals in their house. So again, false analogies. Make sure your comparisons are relevant and logical. Next, false cause. So you assume, right, that because something has happened before something, right, it's caused it, right? Questionable cause is what logically Fallacious calls it. This happens in Macbeth. And again, by now, hopefully everybody has read Act 1. What do the witches say to him? You will be Glamis, Cawdor, and King, right? They refer to him as three names. He already is Glamis, and then he finds out afterwards that he's going to become Cawdor. So he says, since they told me it happened before, they must be telling the truth, and that must have caused it. So I must trust them 100%. Again, superstitions. Just because something happens before something does not necessarily mean it caused it. You do not want to confuse correlation with causation. There needs to be logical, factual evidence to prove cause rather than just time. It's also called post hoc reasoning, and superstitions are a great example of false or questionable cause. Next up, false dilemma, also called either or reasoning or false dichotomy. A dichotomy is when something is broken into two parts. Instead of logically addressing an argument, one reduces it to a simple choice of two possibilities, and one of them is not desirable. So when only two choices are presented, yet more exist, or a spectrum of possible choices exist between two extremes, right? Kind of comes back to parents, right? Do this or else, right? Eat your broccoli or you won't get dessert. Well, why does it have to be broccoli? Why can't I have other choices of vegetables or healthy items, right? When people reduce something complicated down into two choices and only two, and usually it's to persuade you into picking the choice they want you to because the other one is so undesirable. Yet they preclude the possibility of a third or a fourth option. They call it either or reasoning, either this or that, and no other options. Again, it's kind of the opposite of Rogerian strategy, which is being empathetic to multiple perspectives and understanding those different perspectives to work to a mutually beneficial solution rather than it's my way or the highway. If you can't take the heat, then get out of the kitchen. Think about that one, right? Why can't we turn the heat down, right? Why can't we my way or the highway? Why can't we choose a different path, a third option? So when you reduce a situation or an argument that might have multiple options or multiple perspectives down to two and only two, and one of them is less desirable, right? You're kind of forcing, right, your readers or listeners towards the choice you want them to make. And it is a false dilemma. Hasty generalization. An example of this is stereotyping, when we generalize hastily. Haste means quickly, so too quickly, drawing a conclusion based on a small sample rather than looking at statistics and the facts. All blank are blank. Most of the time, that's not based on adequate information. Not only is saying all, right, kind of dogmatic, but when we generalize a group based on a small amount, that is a hasty generalization. It is illogical, and stereotyping is a perfect example of that. There's quite a few interesting stereotypes in the book. And some of you may say, well, some stereotypes are positive. I disagree. Again, if only one member of that group is offended by that, then it cannot be a positive stereotype. So, right, older guests always arrive early, although some old people might take pride in being punctual and on time. What if someone takes offense to that, right? I'm Italian, right? I'm of Italian descent, and I make one hell of a tomato gravy, right? Call it sauce, it's gravy. Nana taught me how properly. Now, if you say all Italian people know how to make a good gravy, right? A good red sauce, what if there's someone who doesn't know how? And again, that's a whimsical example, but most of the time when people think stereotypes are positive, use Rogerian theory and ask yourself, is that a hasty generalization? Because if only one person does not fit that criteria and that becomes problematic for them, then that is not a positive. So personal attack, right? Also the Latin term called ad hominem. You attack the person's argument you attack the person's character rather than their argument, right? Rather than the argument itself. And again, as this says, right, it's abusive. Unfortunately, we see it in politics all the time, especially during the debates when they attack the person's character, they attack their marriage, they attack their husband or wife, rather than the arguments at hand. So make sure that you avoid personal attack, and instead of personal attack, as the book says, substitute a reasoned evaluation of an argument rather than an attack of the person making the argument. Next up, poisoning the well, otherwise known as dogmatism. Instead of false dilemma, where you give two and only two perspectives, and one of them is less desirable, so you're kind of creating this fake dilemma so that the person has to choose what you want them to. Poisoning the well, you don't even give them two options, right? It's just like dogmatism, you say all, right? That is to prime the audience with adverse information about the opponent from the start and attempt to make your claim more acceptable and discount the credibility, right? So you may have heard my side of the story, why I think Bill should be fired and not me. Now I'm sure Bill is going to come at you with some pathetic attempt to weasel out of this lie that he has created, right? Tim is poisoning the well, but right, now I am sure. Whenever anybody says, this is 100%, I'm sure this is going to happen. All this, all that. Again, it's poisoning the well, and it's a form of dogmatism. Like, it precludes the possibility that Bill might not come at you with some pathetic attempt. Okay, so the example in the book is interesting. Every patriotic American supports legislation condemning the desecration of the flag. So wait a minute. If I don't condemn the desecration of the flag, then I'm not patriotic? Can't you be patriotic and love your country, but also view the flag as a symbol and recognize that free speech allows us to burn symbols made of fabric as long as it's not hurting anyone, right? Or arson or vandalism, right? So again, it precludes. So right away, you're not patriotic if you don't think the way that person does. So it's kind of the opposite of Rogerian strategy. Rather than searching for open communication and understanding and empathy, right? It's dogmatic. Next up, a red herring. As the book tells us, this is pretty interesting, right? It comes to us from fox hunting. The strong smelling fish, red after being smoked, a herring, was used to throw hunting dogs off the trail of the fox. It's a diversion, right? It's a deflection from the subject of hand to create a diversion, to direct attention from something instead of focusing on the argument at hand. A perfect example in modern society and culture, when somebody asks you something, you say, well, what about, right? That's a red herring. And we'll notice that Lady Macbeth uses red herrings, right? When she immediately directs attention from the logic of killing Duncan, and she says to Macbeth, when you durst do it, then you were a man, right? When you said you were going to do it, then you were a man. Not only is that a red herring, but that's also a straw man, because she's creating a completely fake argument. He never said he was going to kill Duncan, right? But she distorts his argument and says, well, when you said you were going to do it, then you were a man, and then it proved that you loved me, right? And Macbeth realizes, oh my goodness, well, I want her to think I'm a man, and I want her to think that I love her, so I must kill Duncan then. Again, she creates a straw man, because he never said he was going to kill Duncan. He actually said, we will speak further. So by creating that diversion, creating that straw man, saying, well, because think about it, if he said he was going to kill Duncan and now he's saying he's not, then she can't trust him. And when he says he loves her, how can she trust him then? If someone lies about one thing, perhaps they're lying about another. And if, right, we define masculinity by killing people, which we don't, then she would be correct. If you are a man and if you love me, you'll do it. But both of those are distorted, misrepresented versions of the position of the argument. So we notice that Lady Macbeth is able to use the straw man to persuade Macbeth. And rather than dealing with the argument at hand, you create that distorted or misrepresented version so you can knock it down and claim a victory over it. Just like a straw man, right, in a garden is a fake person. It's a scarecrow. To do what? To create a fake argument to scare away pests and animals from eating your fruits and vegetables. So they think it's a real person there, but in reality, it's a fake argument. I skipped over slippery slope because red herring and straw man kind of seemed like a nice segue there with that Lady Macbeth idea. But a slippery slope is kind of a false dilemma with an appeal to fear included. So you say that either this is going to happen, or now here's the false dilemma and the part about it that's less desirable. Either this is going to happen, or this, which leads to this, which leads to this, which leads to this, The domino fallacy. It's a distortion of the possible events and effects that will happen, right? When a relatively insignificant first event is suggested to lead to a more significant event, which in turn leads to a more significant event, and so on until some ultimate significant event is reached, where the connection of each event is not only unwarranted, but with each step it becomes more and more improbable. Slippery slope, right, is the opposite of using Occam's razor. So notice how using Rogerian strategy and using Occam's razor are the antidote, if you would, or the antithesis of using logical fallacies. They're the antidote to fallacies, if you would, or the antithesis, the opposite of using a fallacy, because they use empathy, understanding, logic, and they avoid hidden assumptions rather than relying on fallacious appeals. I hope that you found this video review helpful. And as always, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching and listening, and write with confidence.